Last session, there's two things. There's firstly a presentation that I'm going to introduce in a second, and then Chris is going to say a few closing remarks and where we go from here with this process and some of the outcomes that we've picked up during the course of the day. So the next paper is a joint presentation between Bjoern of the UK National Commission for UNESCO and Neil Butcher from OER Africa. And I'm going to read the title from my page, but it is possibly different than that. Forging Meaningful Equal Partnerships in OER Between the UK and Africa, subtitled, Enabling Digital Open Learning in Zambian Schools. So Bjoern, please take the floor.
Thanks, Will. So, meaningful partnerships. So the reason this title is up, because I hope that that's one meaningful partnership. I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to hand over to Neil, and we'll have plenty of time for discussion at the end. So mark your points so that you have plenty of things to discuss. I always like starting with the digital divide. It has many different meanings, and there is a digital divide in the UK, but it usually means something different from what it means in an international development context. This is the familiar world map where the territories are divided by land area, unsurprisingly, or perhaps surprisingly, depending on which projection you're used to. But this is the map that shows internet users per 1,000 population. This data is a few years old. I'll show something a little bit more up to date. But essentially, this is the digital divide, the disparity between access to internet. I'm talking of internet users here as a proxy to this. And if you want better data, this is a particular report looking at the costs of internet US dollars per 100 kilobits per second, and you can see sub-Saharan Africa is very expensive there. And so that's all part of the digital divide. Here's another illustration of what the digital divide might look like. This is from the MIT OpenCourseware site that shows the visitors to MIT OpenCourseware. And so unsurprisingly, there's 41% from the United States, 19% Europe, 21%, and you can sort of work out the figures. Africa comes out at 1%. And I've known this figure for many years, and I've always wondered, why is that? You know, if we have this aspiration that OER, you know, if not particularly for Africa, but at least in a sort of global context, should make a difference to education, and if there is such a great need for education in Africa, you know, everybody's talking about the shortage of teachers and the need for more educational facilities. Why is it that it's only 1% from Africa? What is it to do with? How come? And so I had the opportunity, and this is sort of the first kind of meaningful and equal OER partnership. I had an opportunity to discuss this in the context of the UNESCO OER community mailing list, which is a mailing list that has about 800, 900 people on it across the globe, and from all sorts of different regions. And it periodically breaks into these 3-week discussions where certain things are being discussed, OER toolkits, legal frameworks, and all those things. And we had an opportunity to talk about access to open educational resources. And these were some of the things that people said. So here was somebody from Rwanda saying, one of the barriers of using open educational resources in Central and Southern African universities is the issue of bandwidth. They must pay very expensive for that, and they have no money. Here's another one. Last time we participated on the identification of OER materials, but what we faced was the trouble of having access to internet connectivity. It became extremely expensive, and at the moment some schools cannot even afford to continue to have this connectivity. Now, there were lots of different quotes. You know, I could have shown you the ones from Pakistan or the ones from Mexico, but you know, so there are issues to do with access. And so here's a kind of potted summary of that of the outcomes from this discussion, and there's a full kind of 60-page strong report available from the UNESCO wiki and as PDF and so forth as well. But this is kind of some of the outputs from this in the context of a few slides. And I like calling this the OER freedoms. One freedom with OER is a legal freedom. And I think we understand that quite well, because the legal freedom with OER means Creative Commons. So I said this once earlier today, I'll say it again. If you're OER, you're an institution having gotten money under the JISC OER framework. If you'd said to JISC, well, actually, we want to be part of your funding, but we're going to use a license other than Creative Commons. We're going to make up our own license, and it's going to be our institutional license, but of course we want people to use our content. Then JISC would have probably said, well, actually, we're not going to go with that. You need to use an approved license, right? So you'll be a fraud, to some extent perhaps, in open education resources if you're not using a Creative Commons license, and everybody kind of understands that. And to some extent, I think open education resources is even synonymous with kind of Creative Commons. But there are two other freedoms that I think are very important in this. One of which I call technical freedom. And that means to be able to get hold of the materials, as I said earlier, to exercise the right that's given to the end user through the Creative Commons license. When you license your resources under Creative Commons, it's out there in the wild. People have the right to do with it what they want under the terms of the Creative Commons license, so attribution and so forth, but other than that, they can do what they want. Disregardless of whether you want to track it or whatever, once it's out there under Creative Commons, people can do what they want. So you have to enable that. You have to let people do that. You have to let people download, make PDFs available, make RSS feeds available, let people get the content. Okay? So there's lots of aspects to this, and I think the OERs should incorporate that. They should have this understanding of a technical freedom. There's also, I think, an educational freedom in it. Does the resource travel well? Is it phrased in a way that invites participation? What about things like translation? What about tying to various national curricula? How easy is it to place a particular resource in a curriculum framework? Does the resource come with kind of teacher notes? And we've seen great examples from the Open University what those kinds of frameworks might look like. And I think it is important. If the resource is truly free, it needs to have those pointers. It needs to travel well. And so those are the kind of three, I think, this is my potted summary of this report: a legal freedom, a technical freedom, and also this kind of educational or perhaps a cultural freedom that's in it. So now, having identified those things, the question then is, so what, right? So we've done this big report, we've done this big community discussion, everybody agrees that this is good stuff, and we should be doing it, and does it matter in any kind of way? And so this is where the OER for Schools project comes in, which is sort of the second meaningful and hopefully equal OER partnership, where we said right from the beginning in this discussion, we don't just want to have this discussion. The discussion is fine, we need to clarify a few things between ourselves, we need to work out where we're going to go, but we want to focus it on a particular project. There will be a project that comes out at the end of this, and we're going to try and do this project in some way. And so the project that we kind of identified as a possible goer is this OER for Schools project in Zambia. And I'll just finish up by saying a very few things about it. We're basing it kind of on this idea of the OER freedom, so that there's some kind of various elements that come into this. And some of those are more to do with the ICT, they're more to do with the technical things that needs to be enabled in some way. There are resources that are more to do with the OER in themselves, to do with discovery, getting content, viewing content, and then also some teaching and learning issues to do with reusing and embedding and so forth. And we're trying to do all of those different things to address those different aspects that we think are key for actually making OERs work in education. And I could give you a long kind of speech on why I think all those aspects play into each other, are important in that. But it sort of comes down to a kind of really, any educationalist should probably look away, but we're sort of saying that if we can increase access to ICTs, if we can work with the existing ICTs, this is not dropping in ICTs, this is working with existing ICTs in schools, but make them work better, or make them actually work, take the dust covers off and do something with it. If we can also increase learner participation, if we can increase the kind of find better, more participative, more inquiry-based ways of learning, and we can all support this with a third axis of kind of OER, then hopefully we'll get better access to learning. So this is the kind of potted summary of what we're kind of trying to do in that project. And here is the sort of project team for that. It's myself and Sarah Hennessy from the University of Cambridge. We're working with the University of Zambia, Godfrey Moira. Mark Bennett, an ISP in Zambia. We're working with the ministry. We're working with teacher training colleges. and we're hoping that there's an equal and meaningful partnership. Our project itself is very small. We have very small funding. We can only work for half a year or so, so anything that we do will need to be embedded in what's already going on. So we're trying to work with that as best as possible. So activate ICTs for learning and obtaining shareable, high-quality interactive learning resources are important elements in this. And those two things really characterize the project in many ways. And I hope that we're going to present some of the outcomes. Godfrey and myself will present some of the outcomes at eLearning Africa. And at the moment, this is a project in the making. And I hope by eLearning Africa we'll have some good results that we can report back on, and it will then really be a meaningful partnership. So at this point, so that's just me, contact details. My talk's available under Creative Commons. It's always worth saying that at the end. And I'll hand over to Neil to say a few words about some other projects.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm conscious of the fact that I'm the last formal speaker before Chris closes up, so I'll try and keep it down to 5 minutes. Really, all I'm going to do this afternoon, I think, to try and put a practical spin on things, is just talk about two specific projects that we have within OER Africa that we hope you might like to participate in, or at least some of you might like to participate in. I'm a very simple, practical person, so really all we're interested in is how can open educational content develop better quality programs for delivery to students in African countries. And the two specific examples I'm going to talk about are one in Rwanda, which Catherine has mentioned, and then also briefly the other one in Kenyatta University in Nairobi. They're just two examples of actually a long list of projects that we have unfolding through our partnerships. And what we hope is interesting about them is that they are all the result of needs that have been identified specifically by people within the institutions that we're working with. One of the great dilemmas in African higher education settings is that very often when you're talking to people within the context of donor-funded projects, and the people you're talking to have very few resources, so they tend to say yes to everything you suggest in the hope that they'll get some resources from the discussion that they're having. And so what we're trying to do in OER Africa is to strip that part of the conversation out completely and be left rather with a discussion about what the institutions actually need to prioritize over the next 12 to 24 months. And in the National University of Rwanda, we feel very privileged to have come across the project that Catherine has spoken about, where the university, starting September 2010, is intending to begin the delivery of a series of open and distance learning programs to about 200 to 300 students who will, in the first iteration, be working through the Rusizi Learning Center in Rwanda. The program involves delivery of an integrated suite of modules, academic foundation skills, agriculture and rural development, sciences and mathematics, then business studies and computing. And the idea is that students will be able to mix and match those according to their preferences and come out with different Bachelor of Science degree qualifications by the time they're finished. There are three things particularly that interest us about this project. Number one, the university has made a clear commitment to produce the entire program by adapting existing content, not by using its own content. Basically what they're saying is that it takes too long to develop things from scratch, and for this kind of undergraduate degree program, there's a wealth of available resources that we'd like to bring in. They've already constructed their own curriculum framework, so there's very strong academic ownership within the institution for the program that's being developed. It's not a question of taking something from elsewhere and trying to dump it in Rwanda. They're already clear what they're trying to achieve. But now what they're looking for is the best quality content that they can find to populate that program framework with a high quality learning experience for their learners. And that's something we really want to help them to achieve. It's something that Rwanda deserves at the moment. The second thing that excites us about the project which may interest some people here, maybe more from a kind of research perspective, is that they are committing to delivering all of the materials on a low-cost mobile device that they will supply to their students. Now, I think that's a hell of a challenge, and I think there's a whole lot of complexities embedded in what I've just said that are going to make it complex to get to September and be able to deliver the first 6 months of learning. But nevertheless, I think that it's a challenge that's really worth tackling, because if we can get high-quality combination of printable video, audio, and interactive multimedia material onto low-cost mobile devices and deliver it to 200 to 300 students in Rwanda, the potential for replicating that model is enormous. And we think it's incredibly cost-effective. We think it's a good way of investing in trying to develop programs that will work in the context in which we're operating. And very importantly, that works within the current ICT infrastructure. You know, we often hear a lot of this deficit model thinking about Africa and what we're missing, and there's no bandwidth and all this other stuff. But what we're focused on is what the opportunities are. What can we do with what's there? And that for us is exciting about this as well. But the other thing that's exciting and was quite frankly surprising, for me anyway, is that we came into a setting in which the university had already done a cost analysis and come to the conclusion that the program would break even within 4 years and would be self-sustaining after that point. And so they're willing to make the investments in making the program work because they already know how the financial model can work so that the program can be self-sustaining. And that is a very rare occurrence in any university, let alone any university in Rwanda or other countries in Africa. So that's the first project. And my request to any of you who are interested today is if you'd like to get involved in that project, if you'd like to share content that you think can help to build an excellent program delivering that kind of Bachelor of Science experience to students in Rwanda, then we'd like to hear from you. Only serious offers, please, because we have limited time, and so we don't feel like having a lot of conversations with people who are exploring some tangential research interest that they have. This is a serious exercise. We're trying to bring higher education on a large scale to a context that is missing it. The second example is quite similar, and that's at Kenyatta University. We're quite fortunate. We've received quite a lot of funding from the Partnership for Higher Education in Africa, and through that we're managing, supporting institutions, 7 universities across Africa, to develop investment strategies into e-learning. And at Kenyatta University, the Vice-Chancellor, who is probably the most proactive person I've ever met in my life, has decided that they need an executive MBA program that will be delivered entirely online. Again, they've made the strategic commitment that the entire program will be built out of open educational resources. So this is serious institutional commitment to mainstreaming OER as a practice, not a side project that was funded by some donor and, once the donor funding is finished, the project collapses. This is a decision that the institution had already made before we started interacting with them. So what they're looking for now is obviously the best quality content to get an MBA up and running for people in Kenya. And potentially, they're hoping to be able to export that to also Tanzania, Uganda, and so on. So those are just 2 very practical examples of projects that we have on the go that we'd like to start to engage our actual and potential partners in developed world higher education institutions to come on board with and to work with us to make them a success. And we believe that there's a strong value proposition from your side in getting involved in that. Partly, there's the corporate social investment component that some of the colleagues from University of Nottingham spoke about. There's an opportunity just to do good work here, to get higher education working better than it's working today. And I think that that's something worth doing. But I think that the engagement in the spirit of globalization, social networking, and all of the other benefits that come from interaction of this kind would be of such a nature that you're going to learn as much about the requirements for good teaching and learning, about making things work in the context of scarce resources. And my experience over and over again in having the privilege of working in these environments is that I come away feeling like I'm the person who learned the most from the interaction that we have with people. So I believe that these spaces are almost the best learning opportunities for people who are serious about higher education delivery. And that the lessons you'll learn from the interaction and engagement you have will feed directly back into your own teaching and learning practices in your own institutions. So I think there's a strong vested mutual self-interest in the engagement that can flow from this kind of interaction. If those aren't your areas of expertise or interest, I have a long shopping list of other projects. So science projects, chemistry, mathematics, a whole bunch of things, teacher education, health projects. So don't feel left out. There was only time to talk about 2 of them. And what we're hoping is going to happen, and what we're hoping is being kickstarted through our partnership with the University of Nottingham, is a process of interaction with the UK higher education sector where we can invert the traditional way in which things have tended to happen in post-colonial Africa, which is the developed country organizations and institutions go out looking for problems to solve with the solutions that they've already defined. And that what will start to happen through this engagement is that we will be able to articulate the needs that exist on the ground, bring them to developed country partners, and then invite people to come and contribute to responding to the specific problems and needs that exist on the ground in African higher education institutions. And we think that's a very important development. We think it's empowering for both parties, because our experience of developed country partners that we've worked with is that really they're working because they want to make a difference, they want to make a contribution. But it's very difficult to do that unless there's a kind of reciprocal process in which it's clearly defined what the needs are before the engagement starts. And we hope that what we'll be able to do over time is to build a network which will enable us to facilitate a process of getting those requests out to networks of interested parties very rapidly, getting responses, facilitating engagement, sometimes maybe needing to go out and get some additional funding to get the process kick-started. But in other instances where we're talking about just very quick, cheap exercises that maybe don't require any additional funding, just a commitment for some engagement in a limited form over a short period or over a long period, depending on the nature of the engagement. But where we can really see social networking starting to happen to the benefit of higher education, both in Africa and in UK, Europe, and America, and other places where we start to find partners with whom to engage. And we hope to continue working with University of Nottingham as well as other universities in the room to develop such a network and to make it possible to issue the kinds of requests that I'm putting to you today very rapidly without me having to fly for 11 hours and then take the train and discover that it's raining and it's -5 degrees or whatever else. But rather we can just get those things happening in real time as the needs are articulated. And so we hope you'll be interested in participating, at least some of you, and we look forward to interacting with you as the process moves forward. Thanks very much.